The morning air was crisp as I stepped out onto my ranch, the golden rays of dawn filtering through the tall pines that lined the edges of my land. This ranch, passed down through generations, was my sanctuary, a place of peace, hard work, and family pride. My grandpa had spent his whole life maintaining these acres, and now, as I carried on his legacy, every fence post, gravel road, and livestock pen held the weight of our family's blood, sweat, and tears. But peace, I was beginning to learn, is fragile when you're dealing with the HOA. Ever since the Maplewood expansion project had begun encroaching on rural properties like mine, the HOA had become an unwanted force hovering at the borders of my ranch. Their president, Dolores, a woman who perfectly embodied every Karen stereotype, had taken a special interest in my property. Where most people saw trees, wildlife, and open sky, she saw opportunity. She saw land she could control, rules she could enforce, and power she could exercise. And now she was determined to make my life hell. It started small, letters about alleged violations. My gate was supposedly not compliant with some HOA guideline, even though my property was technically outside their jurisdiction. Next, there were complaints about the unsightly tractor I kept near the barn. Then the noise complaints about the rooster Grandpa had raised since he was a chick. Each letter came with an increasingly condescending tone, signed neatly in Dolores's signature cursive. But I had dealt with bureaucrats before. This was my land, and I knew my rights. The ranch wasn't part of their subdivision. Their paperwork didn't include me. But that didn't stop Dolores from trying. One sunny afternoon, I was fixing a section of fence near the private road that cut through the far end of my ranch when I saw her silver SUV creeping down the gravel path. This wasn't her first uninvited visit, but something about her determined expression this time sent a chill up my spine. As usual, she ignored my private property signs, driving right up to the new electric gate Grandpa and I had installed last month. The gate was sturdy, reinforced steel with a hydraulic arm that automatically closed after every entry, part of the security system we had upgraded after Dolores's increasing harassment. She sat there, idling, tapping her nails on the steering wheel while staring directly at me. With a deep breath, I wiped the sweat off my brow and walked toward her. Before I even reached her window, she flung open the door with the kind of drama only she could deliver. "I warned you, young man," she snapped, stepping out and pointing a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You are in violation of multiple HOA ordinances. This gate blocks access to community lands and is not permitted under HOA Code 4.3 subsection B. This is my property, Dolores," I said calmly. "This road isn't part of your HOA. You don't have authority here, and I don't appreciate you trespassing." Her face flushed red, but she maintained her self-righteous tone. "I spoke to the county this morning. They assured me this road borders common grounds. I have every right to inspect this area for compliance and safety." I shook my head. "The county surveyor already confirmed the boundary lines months ago. You saw the documents at the meeting. This land is mine." Her eyes narrowed. "You think a piece of paper gives you the right to endanger community safety? This gate could malfunction and trap someone inside?" "It's designed to automatically open for emergency services," I replied. "And you shouldn't even be here. Now please, turn your vehicle around." Of course she didn't. Dolores never backed down when challenged. Instead, she climbed back into her SUV and attempted to nudge her way forward through the closing gate. The hydraulic arm sensed her vehicle and began retracting, but just as she tried to force her way past, the gate arm struck the side of her front bumper with a loud metallic thud, scraping the paint and bending slightly before locking back into place. Her SUV was stuck halfway inside the gate, unable to reverse without scraping the entire side panel. I couldn't help but wince at the sound, though a small part of me found the poetic justice satisfying. Dolores erupted from her vehicle like a volcano. "You assaulted me with your gate!" she shrieked. This is criminal damage! I'm calling the police! She fumbled for her phone while stomping around, alternating between taking pictures, and shouting into the air as if an audience might materialize to validate her outrage. I stayed calm, stepping back while pulling out my own phone to document the entire scene for my records. That's when Grandpa arrived. Hearing the commotion, from the house he rolled up on his old ATV, the rumble of its engine breaking through Dolores's screeching. Grandpa was a wiry, no-nonsense man in his late 70s who had no patience for entitled people like Dolores. "What in the blazes is going on here?" he asked, surveying the scene. She tried to force her way through the gate. "Grandpa," I explained, and now she's stuck. Grandpa's sharp eyes darted between Dolores and her SUV. "You trespassing again, ma'am? After the sheriff already warned you last time?" Dolores ignored him and shouted into her phone. "Yes, officer. He assaulted me with his gate and trapped me on the road. Send a patrol unit immediately." Grandpa shook his head in disbelief. "We better call the sheriff ourselves before she twists the story worse than she already has." I nodded and called the sheriff's direct line. We'd built a good relationship with the local law over the years, and they were already familiar with Dolores's antics. As we waited, Dolores paced furiously, occasionally glaring at us like we were criminals who had just robbed her of some imaginary right. Within 10 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, their lights flashing as they rolled up the gravel. "Drive." Dolores launched into her performance before they even stepped out of the vehicle. "Officers, thank God you're here. Arrest him immediately. He's trapped me with his dangerous gait. My SUV is damaged because of his negligence. This is a felony." The deputies exchanged glances, clearly familiar with Dolores's theatrics. Deputy Reynolds, the more senior of the two, approached me first. "Morning, son. We got a call about a property dispute. Can you explain what happened?" I calmly showed him the security footage from the gate camera, which clearly recorded Dolores ignoring the posted signs, forcing her SUV forward as the gate tried to close, and ultimately causing the collision herself. Reynolds watched the footage carefully before turning back to Dolores. "Ma'am," he said with a tone of exasperation, "this clearly shows you driving onto private property without permission and causing damage to your own vehicle." "That gate is illegal!" she shrieked. "He has no right to block community access." "This road is not community property, ma'am," Reynolds replied. "The county records verify that this is private land. You're trespassing." But, he can't do this to me," she stammered, now clearly realizing her plan was crumbling. Reynolds sighed. "At this point, you're facing charges for criminal trespass and property damage. I suggest you remain calm." Dolores's face contorted between rage and desperation. "I'm the HOA president. I know my rights." Grandpa chuckled dryly from behind me. "Apparently not, ma'am." As Reynolds called for a tow truck to remove her immobilized SUV from the gate, Dolores continued to rant, but it was over. The evidence was clear, and her self-righteous facade had been stripped bare. What she thought would be a power move had turned into a complete disaster. The tow truck arrived soon after, carefully pulling her SUV free, while Dolores was escorted to the deputy's vehicle to await further questioning at the station. Watching her sputter indignantly while the truck hauled away her damaged vehicle was both surreal and oddly satisfying. After the deputies left, Grandpa clapped me on the shoulder. "You handled yourself well today, son. These kinds of folks count on fear to get their way, stand firm, and they eventually crumble." I nodded, feeling the weight of months of tension finally starting to lift. "Thanks, Grandpa, but something tells me Dolores isn't done yet." He squinted toward the horizon. "Maybe not, but next time, we'll be ready." The events of that day left the entire town buzzing. Word spread fast in Maplewood Ridge and the surrounding areas. After all, it wasn't every day that the president of the HOA, someone known for her iron-fisted control over the neighborhood, was towed off my ranch in front of law enforcement. For most residents, it was long overdue. For Dolores, however, it was merely fuel to escalate her battle into something far more personal. The following morning, I awoke early, as usual, sipping my coffee on the porch as the sun crested over the pine-covered hills. Grandpa was already out by the barn tending to the animals, acting like yesterday had been any ordinary day. But beneath his calm exterior, I knew he was alert, watching, waiting. Dolores was cornered, but people like her don't retreat quietly. They double down. Sure enough, as the day went on, new complications emerged. First, a process server arrived at the front gate, delivering an official-looking envelope. Inside was a civil lawsuit filed by Dolores herself. She was claiming property damage, emotional distress, defamation, and even unlawful imprisonment, asserting that I intentionally trapped her on the road. She requested tens of thousands of dollars in damages and a court injunction to have my gate permanently removed. Grandpa let out a long whistle after reading the papers. Well, son, she's pulling out all the stops now. She's got money, a lawyer, and a whole lot of spite. I folded the papers and set them on the kitchen table. We knew she wouldn't go down easy. But she's desperate, Grandpa added. This is her last hand? I contacted my attorney, Mr. Callahan, who had represented our family for years. A seasoned man in his 60s, he'd handled plenty of difficult cases, but even he seemed a bit amused by Dolores's audacity. She's stretching the law like taffy, Callahan said after reading the documents. Unfortunately, people like her often abuse the court system to intimidate others. But don't worry. We've got solid evidence, video recordings, witness testimonies, and county property records that firmly support your position. He immediately filed a countersuit for trespassing, harassment, property damage, and legal expenses, turning the tables right back on Dolores. Now it wasn't just a civil matter. It was turning into a legal war, a high-stakes standoff between property rights and HOA overreach. Over the next few weeks, court dates were scheduled and depositions began. Dolores paraded into every meeting with her attorney, her nose held high, her voice filled with self-righteous confidence. She played the victim masterfully, painting me as an aggressive troublemaker who was endangering the safety of the entire community. At the depositions, however, her story began to unravel. My attorney presented the gate footage in full, the clear trespassing warnings, her deliberate decision to force her SUV through the gate, and her aggressive behavior captured on camera. Even Dolores's own HOA board members, many of whom had grown weary of her tyrannical leadership, testified that the HOA had no legal claim over my property and that Dolores was acting entirely on her own. Behind the scenes, the HOA board itself was beginning to fracture. Some board members quietly reached out to me, apologizing for the way Dolores had targeted my family. They revealed emails where Dolores had tried to convince them to approve an HOA boundary expansion that would have absorbed my property into their jurisdiction illegally, but many of them resisted, fearing the legal consequences. She's been obsessed with your ranch for years, one board member, Mrs. Thompson, confided. She sees it as her final prize, her legacy. But most of us want nothing to do with this anymore. With this new evidence, Callahan added HOA corruption and attempted boundary fraud to our case. The judge wasn't pleased. During a pre-trial hearing, he sternly warned Dolores's attorney that they were treading dangerously close to legal misconduct. Dolores, while still trying to maintain her composure, was beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Dolores's public support was shrinking. Residents who once feared her or begrudgingly complied with HOA rules now openly discussed her abusive tactics. Online forums, town hall meetings, and local gossip circles buzzed with stories of how she harassed families, imposed unnecessary fines, and bullied homeowners for minor violations. My situation had become the tipping point for years of frustration among residents. In a stroke of poetic irony, one of Dolores's former allies, a man named Howard Sutter, began cooperating with law enforcement. Howard was a real estate developer who had secretly worked with Dolores to expand HOA control so they could drive up property values for new developments. But when investigators uncovered suspicious financial transactions and unreported kickbacks, Howard turned state's witness to save himself. With Howard's cooperation, prosecutors began building a criminal case, accusing Dolores of conspiracy, fraud, and HOA fund mismanagement. She wasn't just facing my civil countersuit anymore. Now, the county prosecutor was involved. The final court date arrived on a cool autumn morning. The courthouse was packed with reporters, HOA members, and curious townsfolk who wanted to witness the downfall of the woman who had ruled over Maplewood Ridge for far too long. Grandpa and I arrived early, greeted by supportive neighbors who offered firm handshakes and nods of encouragement. Inside the courtroom, Dolores sat stiffly beside her lawyer, her face pale but still wearing that familiar mask of superiority. The proceedings moved swiftly. The judge methodically reviewed the overwhelming evidence presented: video footage, sworn depositions, county records, internal HOA emails, and Howard's damning testimony. When Dolores finally took the stand, her attempt to justify her behavior collapsed under cross-examination. She fumbled her words, contradicted her previous statements, and grew increasingly agitated as Callahan calmly dismantled her fabricated narrative. "Mrs. Carmichael," Callahan asked at one point, "if you truly believed my client was trespassing on HOA property, why did you not involve county authorities prior to attempting to forcibly enter his property yourself?" I wanted to inspect the area myself to confirm the violation," she snapped. "Despite numerous warnings from law enforcement to cease trespassing," Dolores's face twisted. "I had a duty to the community, even if it meant violating private property laws and falsifying HOA documentation." Her silence was deafening. The judge had heard enough. After a brief deliberation, he issued a scathing verdict. Dolores was found guilty of trespassing, harassment, and conspiracy to illegally expand HOA boundaries. She was ordered to pay extensive damages for property destruction, legal fees, and emotional distress. The HOA itself faced audits and restructuring, under county supervision. But that wasn't the end. A separate criminal trial soon followed, resulting in Dolores being charged with fraud and conspiracy. She was sentenced to several years in prison, her reign finally broken. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the packed audience sat in stunned silence before erupting into applause, not out of cruelty but relief that justice had finally been served. With Dolores gone, the HOA underwent massive reform. New leadership was elected, including many of the residents who had previously feared speaking out. HOA guidelines were revised to focus on fair governance rather than control. The new board officially recognized my ranch's independence from HOA jurisdiction, permanently ending any future disputes. In the months that followed, the entire atmosphere of Maplewood Ridge changed. Community picnics replaced HOA hearings. Neighbors collaborated on beautification projects rather than enforcing petty rules. And my ranch? It became something of a local landmark, the ranch that stood up to the HOA. Grandpa and I continued to work the land together, enjoying the peace that had finally returned. My gate still stood proudly at the entrance, stronger than ever, a symbol of resilience. Occasionally, tourists and reporters would stop by wanting to hear the full story, and I'd always tell them the same thing. Stand your ground. Know your rights. Bullies lose their power the moment you stop being afraid. One evening, as the sun set and the sky painted brilliant shades of orange and purple, Grandpa and I sat on the porch, sipping sweet tea. "You know, son," Grandpa said, "your great-grandfather would be proud of how you defended this land." I smiled, feeling the cool breeze drift across the fields. "I learned from the best, Grandpa." As we sat in comfortable silence, the stars slowly emerged above the ranch. Peace, hard-fought and well-earned, blanketed our land at last.